Hello students, so this lecture will be on the liver. So liver, as you already know, is the largest gland of the body, has both exocrine and endocrine parts. The exocrine part is going to secrete the bile, and the endocrine part is going to produce several uh, products which might be like synthesis of glucose from glycogen or secretion of fatty acids or anything which the liver secretes directly into the blood. That is the endocrine secretion, and the bile which it secretes into the bile duct eventually, that is the exocrine part. So what is the shape and location of the liver? Liver is roughly a wedge shaped organ. What is the meaning of wedge? Wedge means which has a narrow apex part and a broader base, kind of like a triangle. So in the next slide I will show, this is the shape of a wedge. This is the sharp part of the wedge. This is the broad part of the wedge. So it is wedge shaped. It has a broad base which is directed towards the right side. That also forms the right lateral surface. Now, which areas of the abdomen does it occupy? As you remember, the abdomen is divided into 9 regions by 2 vertical lines, which are the mid-clavicular planes, and 2 horizontal lines, which are the transpyloric plane, which passes through the level of pylorus of stomach, or also passes through the tip of the ninth costal cartilage, and the other horizontal plane is the intertubercular or the transtubercular plane, which passes through the iliac tubercles at the level of lower border of L5 vertebra, and transpyloric is at the level of L1, body of L1 vertebra. So this is the right hypochondrium, this is the epigastric region, this is the left hypochondrium, the right lumbar region, the umbilical region, the left lumbar region, the right iliac fossa, the hypogastrium, and the this left iliac fossa. So liver is occupying, as you can see, most of the right hypochondrium and uh, upper part of the epigastrium, and some part here it is shown to be not reaching the left hypochondriac region, but it does occupy a little part, the rightmost part of the left hypochondrium, right? And what is the absolute weight of liver? In an adult male, the liver weighs around 1400 to 1800 grams, whereas in the adult female it weighs slightly less, ranging from 1200 to 1400 grams. And however, at birth it weighs only 140 grams. The difference is how much proportion liver forms of the body. In a newborn child, it forms a larger proportion of body weight. It is about 4 to 5% of the body weight. It is relatively larger because it has been involved in hematopoiesis in the fetus. Hence, it is comparatively larger at birth, and it occupies almost 2/5 of the abdominal cavity. Whereas in case of adults, it occupies only 2%. It constitutes only 2% of the body weight. Then about the gross anatomy of liver. How many surfaces does it have? How many borders does it have? And how many fissures does it have? So since it is wedge shaped, first focus on this thing. This is a wedge. So it has a surface facing above, that is the superior surface. The boundaries of this are this is the superior surface. A triangular surface facing forwards, that is the anterior surface. Then a surface facing inferiorly, that is obviously the inferior surface. Another triangular surface facing posteriorly, that is the posterior surface. And a surface, quadrangular surface facing laterally towards the right side, called as the lateral surface or the right lateral surfaces. Now out of these, the one facing inferiorly, that is related to other viscera of the abdominal cavity, so it is also referred to as the visceral surface. Whereas the remaining four surfaces, the anterior, superior, posterior, and the right lateral, they are more or less related to the diaphragm or the body wall. So they are also called as the parietal surface or the diaphragmatic surface, right? And then we have the borders. Now, if you focus on this animation, this is the right lateral surface, this is the anterior surface. You can see that there is no sharp border between the right lateral and the anterior surface. Same goes for the border between anterior and superior surfaces. There is no sharp border here, right? So the anterior, right lateral, and the superior surfaces are more or less continuous with each other. This border, between the superior surface which faces upwards and the triangular posterior surface which faces backwards is comparatively prominent. That is called as, it is still comparatively rounded but slightly visible, that is called as the posterior superior border. So posterior superior border separates the superior surface and the posterior surface. Then there is another sharp border, that is the posterior inferior border, which separates the lowest part of the posterior surface and the posterior most part of the inferior surface. So we have the posterior superior border, posterior inferior border, and the sharpest border is the inferior border, which separates the anterior and lateral parts of the inferior surface from the adjoining anterior surface and the lateral surface. This is the inferior border, this one, this, and so on. This is the sharp inferior border of liver, right? So inferior border is the sharpest one. Then we come to slight detail of the surfaces and their relation. So anterior surface is obviously facing forwards, and it is lying in relation to what? It is being covered by the ribs on the right side as well as on the left side. Only a certain central triangular part is not covered by the costal margin. Now if I shift to a 3D model of the liver, then we will be able to see here. Now you can see that this is the inferior border of the liver. Some part of the anterior surface is visible, that is the central triangular part. The right broad part of anterior surface is covered by the lower costal cartilages and ribs. It is actually covered by the 6th to 10th ribs and their costal cartilages, whereas the left part is covered by the 7th and the 8th costal cartilages. If I switch back to the PPT, right? So this broad right part of the anterior surface is in relation to the 6th to 10th ribs and their costal cartilages. The narrow left part is covered by the 7th and 8th costal cartilages, and this central triangular part comes in direct contact with the anterior abdominal wall. It is covered by the xiphoid process of the sternum, and below that it comes in relation to the posterior aspect of the rectus abdominis muscles. Right? Okay. So, and usually the inferior border of liver does not extend beyond the right costal margin. What is the costal margin? This lowest part of the cartilages of the lower ribs. However, in females and in children, the inferior border might extend slightly below the costal margin, and it can be felt on palpation, that is on touching the anterior abdominal wall deeply. Sometimes the inferior border of the liver can be felt. Right. So it is subdivided into left and right lobes by attachment of falciform ligament. What is falciform ligament? This is falciform ligament is a double fold of peritoneum, where the peritoneum, the parietal peritoneum from anterior abdominal wall is being reflected onto the this anterior surface of the liver, and it has two layers. So the attachment of those two layers to the liver on the anterior surface divides the anterior surface into left and right parts. It is also this landmark for division of liver into anatomical left and right lobes. We will be seeing that later. So if I just can show you the falciform ligament. This is a sagittal section through the liver. Here, this is the inferior surface of diaphragm. This is the posterior surface of anterior abdominal wall. This is the falciform ligament, the sickle-shaped double fold of peritoneum extending from inferior surface of diaphragm and from posterior surface of anterior abdominal wall to the anterior and superior surfaces of the liver. It has a convex attached margin, it has a concave attached margin, and it has a free border which contains something called as the ligamentum teres. We will come to that also later on, coming back to the anterior surface. Right. So we have talked about the broad and the narrow parts as well. Okay. So this is the ligamentum teres. Here it has been cut off from its attachment to the anterior abdominal wall. that is, its convex attached border has been cut. Its concave attached part, which is attached to anterior and superior surfaces of liver, is shown, and its lower free border containing the ligamentum teres is also shown. So it is dividing the anterior surface as well as the entire liver into the left lobe and the right lobe. Right. And you can see that inferior border of the liver bears two notches. One is this notch in which the ligamentum teres invaginates, and another is to its right is another broader notch that through which the fundus of the gallbladder is peeking out. Right. Okay. Then coming to the superior surface. Now superior surface, if you see here, it is convex on the right side, and it occupies the undersurface of right dome or right cupola of the diaphragm. It is convex on the left side as well, that is related to undersurface of left dome of diaphragm, and it is concave in the middle where it is related to central tendon of diaphragm and directly above which lies the heart within the pericardial cavity. Right. So superior surface can be described as being concavo convexo, this convexo concavo convex. Right. So it is now I just forgot to mention that the whole of the interior surface is covered by peritoneum except between the two layers of the falciform ligament. So that is the first area of liver that you know which does not have a peritoneal covering, a very narrow strip on the anterior surface between the left and right layers of the falciform ligament. Second area which does not have a peritoneal covering is on the superior surface, where this right layer and left layer of the falciform ligament are diverging from each other. So this is the area on the superior surface which does not have a peritoneal covering. Now relations we have already done. Immediately above the right and left domes of diaphragm, we have the bases of the right lung and the basal part of the right pleural sac, and here we have the base of the left lung and the basal part of the left pleural sac. In the middle, obviously, there is central tendon, and the fibrous pericardium is adherent above on the superior surface of the central tendon. Then we come to the right lateral surface, this one. So we have already done that. That is also in relation to the right part of the diaphragm, but it is in relation to, if we see in this diagram, this surface is in relation to the 7th to 11th ribs. In the mid-axillary line, specifically, if we cut a coronal section through the body, passing through the mid-axillary line, we will see that the right lateral surface of the liver comes in relation to the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th and 11th ribs. Now we divide the right lateral surface into upper 1/3, middle 1/3 and the lower 1/3. Upper 1/3 we will see is coming in relation to 7th and 8th ribs. Middle 1/3 is coming in relation to 9th and 10th ribs, and the lower 1/3 is coming in relation to the 11th rib. Whole of it is in relation to the diaphragm. Now what is important is the structures lying between the diaphragm and the ribs, lateral to the right lateral surface of the liver. So in the upper 1/3 there is the pleural cavity as well as the lowest part of the right lung, and then again the pleural cavity. In the middle 1/3 there is no lung, there is only the pleural cavity. This lowest part of pleural cavity is called as the costodiaphragmatic recess because it is lying between the costa, that is the ribs, and the diaphragm. So it is called as the costodiaphragmatic recess. There is no lung in this part, there is only pleural cavity, whereas in the lower 1/3 you can see that diaphragm is directly in contact with the thoracic wall. There is no pleural cavity in between, there is no lung in between. In the thorax you will study that in mid-axillary line the lower border of lung reaches the 8th rib, whereas the lowest border of the costodiaphragmatic recess reaches the 10th rib. Right. So there is a clinical significance of this thing. Suppose if we need to take some tissue, some part of liver, to examine it under the microscope, that is called as taking a liver biopsy. So what we do is, here we have to introduce a needle through the intercostal space, that the space between the adjacent ribs is called as intercostal space. We need to insert a needle in the mid-axillary line medially so that it reaches inside the liver and can take out some part of a very small part of tissue of the liver, and then we can stain it and examine it under the microscope for diagnostic purposes. Right now, what we want is, we do not want to enter the pleural cavity, we do not want to injure the lung as well, because suppose if the liver is infected, while entering the needle is sterile, but while exiting, if the liver is infected, then this infected tissue is going to pass through the pleural cavity or through the lung if we have inserted the needle farther upwards. So we do not want that to happen. So what we do is, we ask the patient to hold their breath in full expiration. In full expiration, what happens is, in expiration, the diaphragm ascends upwards to decrease the volume of thoracic cavity. So the lower border of lung will ascend upwards, and this lowest edge of the costodiaphragmatic recess is also going to ascend upwards. We ask the patient to hold his or her breath in full expiration, and then we pass the needle inwards through the 9th or the 10th intercostal space. Chiefly usually it is through the 10th intercostal space, to avoid any chance of entering the pleural cavity or damaging or injuring the lung. So liver biopsy is taken through the 9th or the 10th intercostal space in the right mid-axillary line, with withholding the breath in the full expiratory phase. Right. So that is the clinical significance of the right lateral surface. We have talked about that. Here also you can see that this is the 8th rib. If we go backwards, this is somewhat in the mid-clavicular line, but if we trace it backwards, somewhere in the mid-axillary line, 8th rib corresponds with the inferior most aspect of the lung. Similarly, the 10th rib in the mid-axillary line corresponds with the inferior most edge of the costodiaphragmatic recess. This light blue thing is the pleura, and hence containing the pleural cavity between the parietal and visceral layers of pleura, and this is the lung, the inferior border of lung. So we want to go through here without entering the pleural cavity or the lung. Right. Okay. Then we come to the posterior surface of the lung. Now, posterior surface, as we all know, it lies between the posterior-superior border. Comparatively, it is a rounded border, not as sharp as the inferior border. And the second thing is the posterior-inferior border. I will tell you the margins of the posterior-inferior border later on, but this is the posterior surface. So some posterior most part of even the inferior surface is visible on the posterior view of liver. Right. So first of all, we will just discuss what all parts they compose the posterior surface as well as the inferior surface, and then we will discuss them one by one. So first of all, the posterior surface, if you see from the right side to the left side, it is going to compose of, this area is called as the bare area. Bare area is something where there is no peritoneal covering. So one bare area we have already done on the anterior surface, that was lying between the two layers of falciform ligament. One we have done on the superior surface also, between the divergence of the two layers of falciform ligament. Then the largest bare area of the liver lies on the posterior surface between these two layers. These are called as the upper and the lower coronary ligaments, or layers of the right coronary ligament. What happens here is that the visceral peritoneum from the liver is reflected upwards onto the inferior surface of diaphragm, or from here, from the liver, it is reflected backwards over the posterior abdominal wall in front of the right suprarenal and the right kidney and other structures forming the posterior abdominal wall. Right. So this area is directly in contact with the diaphragm. There is no intervening peritoneum. There is only intervening loose areolar tissue and right inferior phrenic artery and some anastomosis between portal and systemic veins. That's all. But there is no peritoneal cavity or peritoneum intervening between the diaphragm and the liver. Right. So the rightmost part of the posterior surface is formed by this triangular bare area. Then there is a groove for inferior vena cava. You can see that here the inferior vena cava is lying within that groove. So if we remove the inferior vena cava, there is a groove, cylindrical groove, or not a complete cylinder, but a partial cylindrical groove for inferior vena cava. Then to the left of it, there is this lobe. This is called as the caudate lobe of the liver. Then you can see there is another double layer of peritoneum here lying within a fissure. This fissure is called as fissure for ligamentum venosum. We will discuss that, what is it. And then further to the left of this thing lies a groove, or a vertical groove for abdominal part of the esophagus, hence called as the esophageal groove. Right. And then between the posterior inferior border and the sharp inferior border of the liver lies this, which is called as the inferior or the parietal surface of liver, and it is this surface which comes in relation to the various other viscera of the abdominal cavity. Might be stomach, might be pyloric part of stomach, duodenum, the transverse colon, hepatic flexure of colon, the right kidney and the right suprarenal, and the gallbladder. So the inferior surface of liver from the left side to the right side, if I go one by one, it is going to be come in relation to the stomach, hence it is called as the gastric impression. Just below and left to the esophageal impression, which was part of posterior surface. Gastric impression forms part of the leftmost part of the inferior surface. Then to the right side of it, there is a projection here that is called as tuberomental. Then there is the fissure for another thing called as fissure for ligamentum teres. Now the ligamentum teres that was lying within the lower free border of falciform ligament, after reaching the liver, this is the notch for ligamentum teres, it gets embedded in the fissure for ligamentum teres and ultimately reaches the left end of this transverse fissure, which is called as porta hepatis, which is the next part of the inferior surface. So we have the porta hepatis, below that we have this thing called as the quadrate lobe, and above porta hepatis, this lowest part of caudate lobe, that is also considered as part of the inferior surface of liver. It consists of two processes. One is this, the papillary process, which extends, projects towards the left side, and there is this long caudate process which projects towards the right side. So papillary process and caudate process of caudate lobe, then the porta hepatis, and then the quadrate lobe of the liver. Then to right of it, we see there is a shallow depression. Now we see that it is being occupied by the gallbladder. So this depression is called as the fossa for gallbladder, or the cystic fossa. Cystic term or cholecysto term refers to the gallbladder. Right. Then to the right of it, we have three impressions. The uppermost impression is for the this first part of the duodenum, and junction, actually for the junction of the first and second parts of duodenum, that is the superior duodenal flexure. Then below that there is an impression for the hepatic flexure of colon, and lowest one is the impression for the right kidney, and just above that is the impression for this right suprarenal. They are more clearly demarcated in this diagram. This is the duodenal impression, and this one is the renal impression. Renal is actually the upper one, and colic is the lowest one. This is the colic impression for the hepatic flexure of the colon. Right. So now we will discuss all these impressions one by one. First of all, have a look at the posterior surface of the liver. Now, if this is a posterior view at the liver, this is the upper layer of the coronary ligament. Now, this area where the upper and lower layers of the right coronary ligament meet is called as the right triangular ligament. Then you can see that right triangular ligament is going. Now, if we start tracing from the falciform ligament, this is the right layer of falciform ligament. We see that it is continuous with the upper layer of the right coronary ligament. Right coronary is continuous with lower layer of the right coronary at the level of the right triangular ligament. Then lower layer of right coronary, after covering the groove for IVC, it again goes upwards along the right margin of caudate lobe. Then goes to the left, then enters the fissure for ligamentum venosum. Here it is continuous with the posterior layer of lesser omentum. Then it goes around the porta hepatis, the posterior layer of lip of porta hepatis. It is continuous with the layer for attached to anterior layer lip of porta hepatis. Then this is continuous with the this left layer of the fissure for ligamentum venosum. In between these two layers, the peritoneum is dipping to form the two layers of the lesser omentum. I will be showing you that in further detail subsequently. Then we see that the left layer in the fissure for ligamentum venosum is continuous with the posterior part of left coronary, then the left triangular ligament, then anterior layer of left coronary, and anterior layer of left coronary is continuous with the left layer of the falciform ligament. So you should know this projection and continuation and tracing of this various layers of peritoneum forming the various ligaments on the posterior aspect of liver. Here we see the anterior view after removing the liver. You can see that these are the two layers of falciform ligament. Right layer is continuous with upper layer of right coronary, right triangular, lower layer of right coronary. Then it ascends on the right aspect of caudate lobe, goes transversely to left, dips into the fissure for ligamentum venosum to become continuous with posterior layer of the this lesser omentum. Then anterior layer of lesser omentum is continuous with the this left layer in the fissure for ligamentum venosum, continuous with the left coronary, left triangular, anterior layer of left coronary, and then finally the left layer of falciform ligament. Okay, and this you see after what are these? After removing the inferior vena cava, we see that these are the hepatic veins which are emerging from within the liver, and they are opening into the left anterior or the anterior or the right anterior aspect of the inferior vena cava. So these are nothing but the openings of hepatic veins into the inferior vena cava. Right. Okay, then we move to the posterior surface. So what can you see in the posterior surface? First of all, we know obviously the bare area. What is the shape of the bare area? It is triangular. So it is the largest area on posterior surface without a peritoneal covering. So this triangle, the apex of this triangle is here at the level of the right triangular ligament, because it is forming this triangle, and its base is formed by the left end of this groove for inferior vena cava, sorry, right end of this groove for inferior vena cava, and its upper and lower margins are formed by the upper and the lower layers of the right coronary ligament. Again, I will just show you the coronary ligament in this diagram here. This is the coronary ligament. It is not actually a true ligament, but it is simply what? It is the visceral peritoneum covering the liver becoming continuous with the parietal peritoneum covering the under surface of the diaphragm. So it is just a reflection of peritoneum from the viscera to the parietes. Right. Similarly, this is the anterior layer of the left coronary ligament, and where the anterior and posterior layers become continuous. Here, the posterior layer is obviously not visible, but this is the apex of the left triangular ligament, and somewhere on the posterior aspect there will be apex of the right triangular ligament. Okay, so coming back to this thing, so the boundaries of the bare area, the largest bare area on posterior surface of liver, you should know. Then, as I already told you, lies in direct contact with diaphragm, but what is intervening between diaphragm and this posterior surface of liver are the loose areolar tissue, right inferior phrenic artery, and communications between some portal and systemic veins. Those systemic veins are actually the diaphragmatic veins. Then in the inferomedial part, this part here, some part of the right suprarenal gland is in direct contact with the posterior surface of liver, sometimes the uppermost part of the kidney. This was the renal impression. So the uppermost part of upper pole of the right kidney might also be in direct contact with the this inferomedial part of the bare area of liver. Right. Now, since we have already talked about three bare areas, one was on the anterior surface between the two layers of falciform ligament, one was on the superior surface where the falciform ligaments two layers are diverging, one we have talked about is in the bare area. There are 5 more bare areas. I will just enlist them one by one. So this is a commonly asked question in practical viva, right? So you should know all the bare areas of liver. So starting from anterior surface, we know that on the superior surface is this one, on the posterior surface one is this triangular bare area, then there is this groove for inferior vena cava. This also does not have a peritoneal covering. Okay, then another area on posterior surface is this fissure for ligamentum venosum. Between the attachments of the two layers of lesser omentum, again in the depth of this fissure or in the floor of this fissure for ligamentum venosum, there is no peritoneal covering. So again bare area. Then we have the left The area between the two layers of the left coronary ligament, that is also bare. Then coming to the inferior surface, there is between the two layers of the fissure for ligamentum teres, the floor of ligamentum fissure, floor of fissure for ligamentum teres, that is also bare. Then porta hepatis itself is also a bare area. There is no peritoneal covering. Peritoneum is attached only to the margins of porta hepatis. So porta hepatis itself is a bare area. Then the fossa for gallbladder, that is also a bare area in most people, that because only the inferior surface of gallbladder is covered by peritoneum, its superior surface or supero-anterior surface is directly in contact with the cystic fossa, hence the cystic fossa also does not have any peritoneal cover, so that is also a bare area, right? So you should know all these 8 areas which do not have a peritoneal covering. Right. Then, so the groove for inferior vena cava, as I've already told you, it is a vertical groove at the left side of base of the triangular larger bare area. Now, this thing is used to hold the liver in the anatomical position. You should, insert your right thumb and the from the top part of the groove for IVC and your the tip of your index finger from the inferior part of the groove for IVC, or in any way just keep the groove for inferior vena cava vertically and facing posteriorly towards you. That is the way to keep the liver in the anatomical position. And obviously then the anterior surface will face anteriorly, right lateral will face towards the right side, superior surface will face towards the superior side, posterior surface will face posteriorly, and the inferior surface, in addition to facing inferiorly, it also faces posteriorly and slightly towards the left side, right? So, and the floor of the groove for IVC is pierced by the right hepatic vein, middle hepatic vein, and left hepatic vein. What I have not mentioned is there is a lower group of smaller hepatic veins also. There are usually 2 on the left side, 1 on the right side, right? The important thing about hepatic veins is that they are the most important supports of liver. They are, now this is a superior view of the liver where I have made the liver transparent. Here you can see this is the left hepatic vein, the middle hepatic vein, and the right hepatic vein. They are all entering the inferior vena cava. This was the groove for inferior vena cava on the posterior surface in which the inferior vena cava is lodged. You can see the hepatic veins are like nails dug into the substance of the liver. So they are the chief factors which are responsible for keeping the liver held in the upper right part of the abdominal cavity, and they do not let the liver move much. The liver does move slightly with respiration. When you inhale, the diaphragm comes down, so the liver also moves slightly downwards, but this movement is not very significant, and it is held in place chiefly by the hepatic veins. Out of the 3 hepatic veins, the right hepatic vein is the strongest support. This vein in dark blue that you are seeing, this is the portal vein, does not contribute to any support of the liver. So hepatic veins are acting as the primary factors in supporting the liver. Other primary factors are the coronary and the triangular ligaments as well. The secondary factors are the viscera which are lying below the liver. So the right kidney, the right suprarenal, the superior duodenal flexure, and the hepatic flexure of colon, the fundus and stomach, fundus and body of the stomach. These are the viscera plus the tone of the abdominal wall muscles. So the tone of abdominal wall muscles will keep the upper abdominal viscera pressed on the inferior aspect of liver, so it will not allow the liver to descend down. So they are the secondary supports of the liver, and tertiary support of the liver is the falciform ligament. So the least important one is the falciform ligament. So you should remember primary supports, secondary supports, and tertiary supports. Most important ones are the hepatic veins, and then you mention the coronary and the triangular ligaments. On second number are the viscera lying below the liver, that is the right kidney, right suprarenal, and the superior duodenal flexure and the hepatic flexure of colon. And the least important or the tertiary support is the falciform ligament, right? Okay, then there is something called as pons hepatis. What is pons hepatis is usually what happens is that usually the posterior most aspect of inferior vena cava is in direct contact with posterior abdominal wall. It is not covered by any part of liver, because the rightmost part of this caudate lobe and the remaining part of posterior surface of liver, there is a gap between the two. Sometimes there is liver tissue bridging this gap so that you cannot see inferior vena cava, and it appears like there is an actual complete cylindrical tunnel within the liver, not a groove but a complete tunnel. So that bridge of tissue which bridges this gap, that is called as pons hepatis. The term pons literally means a bridge. So if there is a hepatic tissue bridging this gap, if the inferior vena cava is covered by hepatic tissue, that is called as the pons hepatis. Right? Okay. Then we come to the caudate lobe. So caudate lobe, now this is further to the left side of the posterior surface, to the left side of the groove for inferior vena cava. What are its boundaries? We can see that on the right side it is bounded by the left edge of the groove for IVC, superiorly the posterior superior border of the liver. Then on the left side there is the fissure for ligamentum venosum, and inferiorly there is porta hepatis. So these are the boundaries of the caudate lobe. Right, so it has an anterior surface also. Here, from here it might seem that it only has a posterior surface. This posterior surface is facing backwards, but it has an anterior surface also, which lies in the depth of this fissure for ligamentum venosum. This fissure for ligamentum venosum is quite deep. If I show you in this diagram, this is the posterior view, this is a transverse section through the liver, somewhat at this level. If we cut a transverse section and view it from upwards, superior view of transverse section through the upper part of liver, here we can see that this is the leftmost or the apex. This might be called as not the apex but the left, this inferior border of the liver. This is the anterior surface. This whole is the posterior surface. Here you can see that this is the groove for esophagus. This is the fissure for ligamentum venosum. This is the posterior surface of the caudate lobe. This is the groove for IVC. This is the remaining part of the bare area of the liver, which is in contact with the left suprarenal gland. Here you can see that this fissure for ligamentum venosum, this is just for the sake of explanation, it has been shown to be so wide. Otherwise it is not so wide, but now this is called as the anterior wall, and this is called as the anterior lip of the fissure for ligamentum venosum. This is the posterior wall, and this is the posterior lip of the fissure for ligamentum venosum, and this is the caudate lobe. Now here you see that if we trace the peritoneum, this is the left layer of the falciform ligament. It is covering the anterior surface. Then across the inferior border of liver, it is covering the posterior surface of liver. Then it dips down into the this anterior wall of fissure for ligamentum venosum. It comes back as the anterior layer of lesser omentum. This is the gastrohepatic part of the lesser omentum, or the left part of the lesser omentum. Then it covers the anterior surface of stomach, goes on to form the first layer of greater omentum. Then the fourth layer of greater omentum is going to come back, right, and that is going to reach here. No, this is actually the second layer of greater omentum. The third and fourth are going to come and reach the anterior aspect of transverse mesocolon and then reach the posterior abdominal wall. Second layer of this greater omentum covers the posterior aspect of stomach, forms the posterior layer of lesser omentum, then lines the posterior wall of the fissure for ligamentum venosum, lines the posterior lip of fissure for ligamentum venosum, and then covers the posterior surface of the caudate lobe. So the fissure for ligamentum venosum contains 4 layers of peritoneum, the middle 2 of which are nothing but the lesser omentum. So lesser omentum dips down into the fissure for ligamentum venosum to get attached to the floor of fissure for ligamentum venosum. Within the floor, this is the ligamentum venosum itself, which is nothing but a remnant of ductus venosus, that is a channel present in the fetus which carries oxygenated blood from left branch of portal vein to the left hepatic vein to bypass the hepatic circulation. Right, so this is the attachment of the vertical limb of the lesser omentum. If you remember the lecture of stomach and peritoneum, you will remember that the attachment of lesser omentum on the liver is J-shaped if we look from in front. The vertical limb of that J is attached in the fissure for ligamentum venosum, and the horizontal part of that J is attached across the 2 lips of the porta hepatis, right? And if we look from the posterior view, then that J comes to appear like an L shaped. Again, the vertical limb of L is attached in the floor of fissure for ligamentum venosum, and the horizontal limb of that L is attached to the two lips of the porta hepatis. Right. Then the leftmost part of the posterior surface is the groove for esophagus, which is just related to the abdominal part of esophagus, and it is again covered by peritoneum. So here, this is the diagram that I have introduced to show the lesser omentum. Here, lesser omentum has been shown to be slightly transparent. It is usually not transparent. It is contains fat, but this is the gastric attachment of the lesser omentum. This part is the gastrohepatic ligament, and this right free margin of lesser omentum, which contains the common hepatic and the common bile ducts on the right side. On the left side, it contains the proper hepatic artery, and behind both of these, it contains the wide portal vein. This right free margin of the lesser omentum is called as the hepatoduodenal ligament, because it is attaching this the lips of porta hepatis, which are part of the liver, to the upper border of first part of duodenum. So hepatoduodenal ligament, and that contains those three structures, and behind this right free border of lesser omentum lies the epiploic foramen. We will come to that also later on. Here, this liver has been retracted upwards. Otherwise, the inferior border of liver is lying like this, and the gallbladder also is lying under cover of the liver. Here we have held the inferior border of liver and pulled it upwards, retracted it from here to upwards to show the inferior surface of the liver. Here, the lowest part of the caudate lobe is visible, which forms the lowest part of inferior surface of liver. Right. So this is again a view from older editions of Gray's Anatomy, again showing the posterior surface containing the bare area, the groove for IVC, the caudate lobe, fissure for ligamentum venosum, and the esophageal groove. So this is the posterior surface. Here, the openings of the hepatic veins are also visible because the upper part of IVC has been cut off. You can see the falciform ligament, margins of the this coronary, left triangular, posterior part of right coronary, then lining the caudate lobe. Now, this part of peritoneal cavity belongs to the lesser sac. Again, coming to this diagram, we know that behind the stomach lies the lesser sac. So the posterior wall and lip of the fissure for ligamentum venosum are lined by peritoneum of lesser sac, whereas the anterior wall and lip of the fissure for ligamentum venosum are lined by the peritoneum of the greater sac, because in front of stomach lies the greater sac. If we see in this whole part of peritoneal cavity is the greater sac, whereas if we go through the epiploic foramen behind the lesser omentum, we would have entered the lesser sac, that is this part. Right. Okay. And the inferior surface of liver is also visible here, which comes in relation to the fundus and body of the stomach, first part of duodenum, pyloric part of the stomach and first part of duodenum comes in relation to the gallbladder, and the superior duodenal flexure. This part comes in relation to the transverse colon and the hepatic flexure of colon, and this part comes in relation to the kidney, hence the renal and the suprarenal impressions. And this is the porta hepatis, this is the fissure for ligamentum teres. Right. Now, if we do a transverse section through the lower part of the liver, that is passing through the fissure for ligamentum teres, here we will see that it contains only 2 layers of peritoneum. There are no intervening another 2 layers of peritoneum, and this whole peritoneum is forming part of the greater sac because it is lining this part of the liver. Right. So this is forming part of the greater sac only. So if we do a transverse section through this part of the liver, here you will see this is the gastric impression, this is fissure for ligamentum teres, this is the posterior surface of quadrate lobe, this is the cystic fossa, and these are the colic and the renal impressions. And then we reach the right lateral surface, anterior surface, and the inferior border. This is also part of inferior border of the liver. Right. So starting the from the another view, another diagram showing the inferior surface of liver. So this part is related to fundus and body of the stomach. This part is related to the tuber omentale of the superior border of pancreas. Okay, there is intervening cavity of lesser sac and the lesser omentum in between the pancreas and the tuber omentale of pancreas and tuber omentale of liver. Then there is fissure for ligamentum teres. There is quadrate lobe related to the pyloric part of stomach and the first part of duodenum. Then there is cystic fossa related to the gallbladder. There is duodenal impression related to superior duodenal flexure, that is junction between the first and second parts of duodenum. Renal impression related to upper part of right kidney, and colic impression related to hepatic flexure of colon. Then the lowest part of caudate lobe consists of this projection called as papillary process that projects towards the left side, that is related to origin of the celiac artery from the ventral aspect of the abdominal aorta. And then there is the caudate process that projects transversely to the right side from the junction of right border and lower border of caudate lobes. It extends between the porta hepatis and the groove for IVC and becomes continuous with the inferior surface of the liver, forming the duodenal impression. Right. Then there is porta hepatis intervening between the caudate process and the upper part of caudate lobe, which contains from anterior to posterior. It will have the left and right hepatic ducts. Then it will have the left and right hepatic arteries, and then it will have the left and right divisions of the portal vein. So we will just discuss these one by one. Gastric impression I have already told you. Tuber omentale I have told you that it is this part projection between the this gastric impression and the lowest part of fissure for ligamentum venosum. This is the tuber omentale, and that uh, projects towards tuber omentale of pancreas separated by the lesser omentum and the cavity of lesser sac. Fissure for ligamentum teres lined by peritoneum greater sac extends from notch on inferior margin of the liver. I have told you that there is a notch on inferior margin of liver. This is that notch for the ligamentum teres, and it extends from that notch to the left end of porta hepatis. So this is the extent of the fissure for ligamentum teres, and it is a remnant of the left umbilical vein, which is another important component of the fetal circulation. It carries oxygenated blood from placenta to the liver. Uh, if you remember general embryology, the umbilical cord contains two umbilical arteries, which are branches of the internal iliac artery. They carry the deoxygenated blood from the fetus to the placenta, and there is a single umbilical vein in the fetus. Initially, there are two umbilical veins, left and right, but out of them, the right umbilical vein degenerates, only the left umbilical vein is left. So, the left umbilical vein, after the umbilical cord reaches the fetus and attaches to the umbilical region of fetus, in it the left umbilical vein travels from umbilicus to the liver within the free border of the falciform ligament, and that in the adults the remnant forms the ligamentum teres. It actually does not get obliterated, but it is just collapsed, and it can be catheterized to gain access to the left branch of the portal vein in young children, and it is actually catheterized to do something called as exchange transfusion. Okay, then there is ligamentum teres, which we have discussed. Then we come to the quadrate lobe. So, quadrate lobe is this part, this quadrilateral shaped lobe. What are its boundaries? On left side, fissure for ligamentum teres. On right side, there is cystic fossa. Above it, there is the porta hepatis, and below is the inferior margin of the liver. What is it related to? As I've already told, pyloric part of stomach, first part of duodenum, plus it is also related to the right free margin of lesser omentum in its upper part, and sometimes the transverse colon also in the lower part if the stomach is empty. Then porta hepatis, another important question asked in the Viva: what is porta hepatis? What are the structures passing through porta hepatis, entering the liver or leaving the liver, and whether it is a true portal to the liver or not? So what is its definition? It is a transverse non-peritoneal fissure. It acts as a gateway for the liver. What are the structures entering through the liver? So if we just magnify this part here, we look at it from the superior aspect. This is the anterior aspect, posterior aspect, this is the left aspect, this is the right aspect. Then we can see that it contains the bifurcation of the common hepatic duct into left and right hepatic ducts. It is actually not bifurcation but union of the right hepatic duct and the left hepatic duct to form the common hepatic duct. Similarly, so what is leaving the liver through the porta hepatis? They are the right and the left hepatic ducts and certain lymphatic vessels, the deep lymphatic vessels. They are leaving. And what is entering the liver? The left and the right branches of hepatic artery, the left and right divisions of portal vein, and the hepatic plexus of nerves. So whether you are asked contents of right free border of the lesser omentum, you will say the common hepatic duct, the proper hepatic artery, the portal vein, lymphatic vessels of the liver, and the hepatic plexus of nerves. And if you are asked what structures enter or leave liver through the porta hepatis, then you will say left and right hepatic veins, left and right hepatic arteries, left and right portal veins, deep lymphatic vessels of liver, and the hepatic plexus of nerves. Right. Okay. Now, where does the porta hepatis lie? It lies between, this is the caudate process of the caudate lobe of liver and the upper part of the quadrate lobe. They are lying above and below. On the left side, there is the union of fissure for ligamentum venosum and upper end of fissure for ligamentum teres. And on the right side, there is the uppermost part of the cystic fossa. Right. Now, lips of porta hepatis, they give attachment to anterior and posterior layers of lesser omentum. As I've already told you, at the right end of porta hepatis, both these layers are continuous with each other to form the right free border of the lesser omentum. And structures entering the liver that and leaving the liver, I've already told you. Structures leaving the liver are this hepatic ducts and lymphatics. Arrangement from anterior to posterior you should know. In the porta hepatis, from anterior to posterior, the arrangement is the two hepatic ducts, the two hepatic arteries, and the two portal veins. But in the right free margin of porta hepatis, this hepatic duct lies slightly towards the right side. The proper hepatic artery is slightly towards the left side. Both of them are lying in front of the portal vein, which occupies the whole of posterior aspect of the right free margin of the lesser omentum. Okay. Then next we come to the caudate and papillary processes. I've already told you caudate process. It is called caudate because it is a tail-like projection, extends transversely to the right from the junction of lower and the right margins of caudate lobe, and to the right between porta hepatis and groove for IVC. It forms the roof of the epiploic foramen somewhere here. Roof of epiploic foramen. So what are the borders of the epiploic foramen if we open this diagram? So above lies the caudate process. It is not visible. In front lies the right free border of lesser omentum. Below lies the first part of upper border of first part of duodenum, and behind lies the inferior vena cava. Right. So this is inferior vena cava. This is the right free border of lesser omentum containing, in addition to portal vein, it will contain the proper hepatic artery and the common hepatic duct in the upper part and common bile duct in the lower part after cystic duct has united with the common hepatic duct. Inferior margin is formed by upper border of first part of duodenum, and superior margin is formed by the caudate process of the liver. So this is a communication between the lesser sac and the Morison's pouch or the hepatorenal pouch or the right posterior subhepatic space. Right. So what is papillary process? We have already told you that is related to it is lying at the junction of the lower border and the left border of the caudate lobe, and it comes in relation to origin of the celiac trunk of the celiac artery. Then fossa for gallbladder. Again, one of the bare areas, non-peritoneal, extends from cystic notch. One of the two notches on an inferior border. One was the notch for ligamentum teres, the other one was cystic notch for the fundus of gallbladder. So the cystic fossa extends from cystic notch to the left end of the porta hepatis. Right. So what lies between the gallbladder and the liver? There is loose areolar tissue and there is deep branch of the cystic artery, the artery supplying the gallbladder, which most commonly is a branch of the right hepatic artery. Right. Then floor of the fossa is sometimes pierced by a vein draining the gallbladder, that is the cystic vein, and sometimes by a accessory hepatic duct which opens directly from liver into the gallbladder. Then rarely gallbladder is intrahepatic and buried by something similar to pons hepatis, which was covering this gap between the right margin of caudate lobe and the remaining part of liver. That was pons hepatis. Pons hepatis can exist here also, burying the gallbladder within the liver. In that case, the liver is called the gallbladder is said to be intrahepatic, right? If gallbladder is not seen here on the inferior surface of liver, it might imply three things: either there is intrahepatic gallbladder, or the gallbladder is absent congenitally, or the gallbladder has been removed surgically as a treatment for cholecystectomy or other conditions of the gallbladder, right? Mostly this is a bare area because the peritoneum bridges from this part of liver to this part of liver, so it covers only the posterior inferior surface of gallbladder, whereas anterior superior surface of gallbladder comes in direct contact with cystic fossa. But sometimes the peritoneum reaches the cystic fossa, then forms a mesentery, then surrounds the gallbladder, again reaches the cystic fossa, and then covers the remaining surface of inferior surface of liver. In that case, if the gallbladder has a mesentery, then the cystic fossa, the bare area in the cystic fossa will be limited to only a very narrow strip between the two layers of mesentery of the gallbladder, right? Then we come to the remaining three impressions: the duodenal impression, the renal impression, and the colic impressions. Duodenal impression is immediately to the right side of cystic fossa, related to superior duodenal flexure. Colic impression is shallow fossa to the right of duodenal impression, and it is extends up to the inferior border. Actually, it extends up to, yes, this is the colic impression, this one is the renal impression. So it extends from here to the inferior border of the liver, and it is related to the hepatic flexure of colon. The renal impression lies above and behind the colic impression, extends up to the lower limit of the bare area, where it is continuous with the suprarenal impression. It is related to upper pole of right kidney, and it is separated from kidney by the right posterior subhepatic space, or the Morrison's pouch, or the hepatorenal pouch. Now this inferior layer of coronary ligament, which is actually the reflection of visceral peritoneum covering the liver to the visceral peritoneum covering the anterior aspect of right kidney, that is also sometimes called as the hepatorenal ligament. So this is the difference. The upper layer of coronary ligament is visceroparietal because it is a reflection of visceral peritoneum from liver to the parietal peritoneum covering undersurface of diaphragm, whereas the inferior layer of coronary ligament is viscerovisceral because it is a reflection of visceral peritoneum covering posterior surface of liver to the visceral peritoneum covering the posterior surface of the anterior surface of the right kidney. Now we come to the lobes of liver. I have already told you that the attachment of falciform ligament anteriorly and posteriorly, the two fissures, the fissure for ligamentum venosum and the fissure for ligamentum teres, this is dividing the liver into something called as anatomical lobes. So to the left of attachment of falciform ligament on the anterior aspect lies the left lobe, which forms roughly just 1/6 of the liver, and to its right side there is a large right anatomical lobe which forms 5/6 of the liver. However, this has no functional significance because even this much part of the so-called anatomical right lobe is actually being supplied blood by the right hepatic artery and the right division of the portal vein. So this functionally belongs to the left lobe of liver. So we have to devise something called as functional or surgical division of the liver, which actually has some surgical significance. So for that, what we do is we draw an imaginary line extending from the uppermost part of groove for inferior vena cava to the cystic notch on the anterior surface, and on the posterior surface it will pass through the middle of cystic fossa and then pass through the middle of groove for inferior vena cava. This line is called as Cantley's line, or also called as cholecystovena caval line. This is dividing the liver into actual functional left lobe and the functional right lobe. These are also called as functional or physiological or surgical lobes of this liver, and this division, this classification is will be studying further, that each lobe is divided into four segments each. This was given by Quino. Some people pronounce it as Quinaud, and some pronounce it as Quino. So we call it as the Quino's classification. So Cantley's line, you must know, it extends from the groove for IVC to the cystic notch on the anterior surface, and on posterior surface passes through the cystic fossa and the groove for IVC. Right, so on the anterior surface, this is lying to the right side of falciform ligament. So this part also, which belong to the anatomical right lobe, is actually belonging to the physiological or functional left lobe. Okay, so what is the basis of this functional division? What happens is that uh, in between the divisions between the left lobe and the right lobe, and then further divisions of left lobe into a lateral and medial sector, similarly the right lobe into a medial and lateral sector, in between these sectors lie the left, middle and the right hepatic veins. So the hepatic veins are intersegmental in position. What happens to the hepatic artery and the portal vein is, this is the main portal vein, this is the left division of portal vein. This is going to divide into two branches. The posterior or the lateral branch will supply the second segment, and the anterior or the medial branch, actually the division, will supply the third and the fourth segments. Same goes for the right portal vein. Its anterior division will supply the fifth and the eighth segments, which form the medial sector or the anterior sector of right functional lobe, and its posterior division will supply the sixth and the seventh segments, which form the lateral sector or the posterior sector of the right functional lobe. Right. So each segment, so this numbering of segments is, if you look at it from front, it is in clockwise fashion. This segment 1 is constituted by the caudate lobe. This is supplied by the right portal vein, also by the left portal vein also. Same goes for its arterial blood supply, supplied by the right hepatic artery mostly, but it can receive arterial blood from the left hepatic artery also. So this numbering goes in a clockwise fashion. Segment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. So this is the Quino's classification. What is their surgical significance is, since each segment is receiving its blood supply from a principal branch of the hepatic artery or the portal vein, each segment can be removed independently without much bleeding and without causing damage to other neighboring segments. So instead of removing a larger part of the liver, if some disease process is limited to this segment only, then only this segment can be removed. That is called as the segmentectomy, removal of an individual segment of liver. However, still there will be some bleeding from the intersegmental location of the hepatic veins that the surgeon has to deal with, but this is the clinical significance of the surgical division of the liver, that individual segments of the liver can be removed in disease processes. Right. Okay, now coming to the details. Now we have already done that within functional lobes, both the right and left hepatic artery or portal vein division, they divide into the anterior and posterior divisions, dividing each functional lobe. Suppose the left functional lobe is divided into the lateral sector consisting of only segment 2 and the medial sector consisting of segments 3, 4 and 1. Similarly, the right portal vein as well as the right hepatic artery will divide into an anterior branch and a posterior branch. Anterior branch will supply the medial sector or the anterior sector consisting of lower segment 5, upper segment 8, and the posterior division of portal vein or the posterior branch of right hepatic artery will supply the lateral or posterior sector, which is divided into a lower segment 6 and an upper segment 7. Right. So these are these fissures between the functional lobes and between their division into medial and lateral sectors, these are called as the portal fissure. The main portal fissure lies between the left and the right functional lobes, and this corresponds to the Cantley's line on the surface, and it contains the middle hepatic vein. The right portal fissure contains the right hepatic vein, and the left portal fissure contains the left hepatic vein. This is the umbilical fissure. This corresponds to attachment of the falciform ligament anteriorly and the fissure for ligamentum venosum and fissure for ligamentum teres posteriorly, and this also contains a large tributary of the left hepatic vein, right? And it also contains a straight segment of left branch of the portal vein. This is called as recessus of Rex. This is important in a surgical operation called mesorex operation, which is one of the treatment of prehepatic portal hypertension in children that you will be told later on in the lecture on portal hypertension, right? Okay, then as I've already told you, lateral sector of functional left lobe. This is the lateral sector that consists of segment 2 only. So it is supplied by which branch of hepatic artery in portal vein, and this you can study. I've already discussed this. And so various sectors consist of which segment. So this is now this is a rotating animation. Here you can see that 5 and 8 form the anterior or medial part of the right lobe, whereas 6 and 7 they form the lateral and posterior part of right lobe. Segment 2 and 3, here segment 2 forms the lateral most part of the left lobe. 1, 3 and 4, 1 is formed by the caudate lobe, which we will see on posterior surface. 4 forms this area between the attachment of falciform ligament and Cantley's line. It is lying on the anterior surface also and on the inferior surface also. So segment 4 lying on anterior surface also, segment 4 lying on inferior also. Its posterior part is formed by segment 1. Right. What is the clinical significance of this functional division? One, I have already talked about the segmentectomies of liver. Another thing is that now these right and left hepatic arteries, after originating from the proper hepatic artery and then further dividing, so these right and left hepatic arteries are the lobar arteries or the primary arteries. Then they divide into their anterior and posterior divisions, which are the secondary branches, and then the anterior division will divide into superior and inferior division. Those are tertiary or segmental branches. Same posterior division will also divide into superior and inferior branch. Those are again the tertiary or the segmental branches. So these segmental arteries are not going to communicate with each other. So it is possible to perform hepatic lobectomies. We can remove a complete lobe also without doing any damage to the other lobe, and we can remove segments of individual segments of the complete lobe also. So instead of lobectomy, we can do a segmentectomy as well without excessive bleeding. Another thing is that most injuries to the liver involve right liver. Liver is the most commonly injured viscera in blunt abdominal trauma. If there is blunt trauma to the abdomen, if there is blunt trauma to upper right part of abdomen, there are very great number of chances that the liver will be damaged. So most injuries to liver involve the right liver. More recently, especially since the advent of cauterizing scalpel and laser surgery, it has become possible to perform hepatic segmentectomy. So this procedure makes it possible to remove or resect only those segments that have sustained a severe injury or are affected by a tumor. So it is possible to do segmentectomies. Then we know that, as I've already told, the right intermediate and left hepatic veins, they serve as guides to the portal fissures or the fissures between the hepatic divisions. I know it is confusing that even though hepatic veins are lying within them, they are called as portal fissures. Why portal fissures? Because portal vein, the different branches of portal vein are going to supply the different segments. So although they are portal fissures, what is lying within them is the hepatic veins. However, these hepatic veins also serve as a major source of bleeding during these so-called segmentectomies and lobectomies, with which the surgeon still has to deal. Then we come to the blood supply of liver. Now the liver, like the lungs, has a dual blood supply. It has a dominant venous blood supply and has a comparatively lesser by volume and arterial blood supply. So the hepatic portal vein is going to bring venous blood, which constitutes roughly 75 to 80% or three-fourths of the blood supply of liver is coming via the portal vein. Now, even though the portal vein is carrying venous blood, which is coming from the intestine, it still carries 40% more oxygen than the blood returning to heart from other systemic veins. So this much oxygen, even though it is less than that present in the arterial blood, but it is enough to sustain the liver parenchyma. So it does provide oxygen to the liver parenchyma. What is importance of the portal blood is it is carrying all the nutrients which have been absorbed from the intestine. So all these nutrients except fats, they are absorbed by the alimentary tract and they are taken by this portal blood to the sinusoids of the liver, which you have studied in this microanatomy of liver. What are sinusoids? What is space of Desai? What is space of Moll? And so on. So sinusoids of liver are receiving blood from portal vein as well as hepatic artery. So portal vein is bringing all the digested nutrients. Fats, however, they bypass the liver. Lipids, they bypass the liver and they enter the lymphatic system, how we will study subsequently. Arterial blood is obviously coming from hepatic artery, which is a branch of the celiac trunk. How it arises, I will just discuss in a short while. So this brings 25% of blood supply to the liver. So 1/4 of the blood supply of liver is coming from hepatic artery, 3/4 is coming from the portal vein. Right. So and this arterial blood is distributed initially to the non-parenchymal structures, particularly the intrahepatic bile ducts. Right? Okay. Now, arterial blood we have done, then hepatic portal vein, how is it formed? There will be a separate lecture on this, but I will just give you an overview that it is formed by the superior mesenteric and the splenic veins posterior to the neck of the pancreas, and it ascends anterior to inferior vena cava in the anterior margin of the epiploic foramen as part of the portal triad in the hepatoduodenal ligament. The hepatic artery, which is a branch of the celiac trunk, see, this is the origin of celiac trunk. Just after originating celiac trunk, it divides into its largest branch, the splenic artery, the second largest branch, the common hepatic artery, and the smallest branch, the left gastric artery. Right? The common hepatic artery is actually the largest branch in the fetus because the liver needs a lot of blood flow for hematopoiesis. So this is the largest branch in the fetus, but in adults, splenic artery is the largest branch. So now, common hepatic artery, this is called as common hepatic from its origin up to the origin of the gastroduodenal artery. It also gives the right gastric artery either from the left side or from the right side of the gastroduodenal, but we call common hepatic artery what is the extent from the origin from celiac trunk to the origin of gastroduodenal artery. After that, we start calling it as proper hepatic artery, and that divides into the left hepatic artery and the right hepatic artery, and that usually gives the cystic artery. Right. So gastroduodenal to, so proper hepatic artery is from origin of gastroduodenal artery up to the bifurcation of the proper hepatic artery into its right and left parts. Now this is the most common variation which is present. This is celiac trunk, we get the left gastric artery, we get the splenic artery, then we get the this common hepatic artery, we get the gastroduodenal and the right gastric arteries from the this common hepatic, and then proper hepatic divides into left and the right hepatic branches. We see that right hepatic branch, first it has given the cystic artery to gallbladder, then it divides into an anterior division which is going to supply the anterior or medial sector, that is segments 5 and 8, plus it also supplies the caudate lobe, that is segment 1, and a posterior or lateral division which supplies the lateral sector consisting of segments 6 and 7. However, what can happen is that in 10 to 30% of people, the origin of the left and the right hepatic arteries might be different. So if any artery arises from a source which is not the most common source, then it is called as a replaced artery or an aberrant artery. So the left hepatic artery might come from the left gastric artery in 10 to 30% of people, and the right hepatic artery might come from the second ventral branch of abdominal aorta, which is the superior mesenteric artery. So in the subsequent this one. So here what is happening is that this is the common hepatic artery and it has given the left hepatic artery, but the right hepatic artery is coming from the superior mesenteric. And the other variation is that the left gastric artery is giving the left hepatic artery, whereas the common hepatic artery is giving only the right hepatic artery. So these are the common variations. So normally what happens is that this part of proper hepatic artery is lying in the right free margin of lesser omentum at a variable distance beneath the porta hepatis. Some porta hepatis is somewhere here. So before entering porta hepatis, before entering the liver, the proper hepatic artery divides into right and left, and they supply the right and left functional livers. Within right and left liver, simultaneous secondary branchings of hepatic portal vein and hepatic artery supply the medial and lateral divisions of right and left liver, which we have already talked about, with 3 of the 4 secondary branches undergoing further division. Now this is undergoing further division into superior and inferior, this is further undergoing division into superior and inferior, and the anterior branch of the left hepatic artery is also undergoing division into the segmental artery supplying the third and the fourth segments. Between the divisions again we know are the right intermediate and the left hepatic veins in the portal fissures, which are intersegmental in their distribution, and so drain the adjacent parts of segments. So if we look at this thing, so the right hepatic vein is going to drain all the adjoining segments, that is 5 as well as 6, 7 as well as 8. The middle hepatic vein is going to drain segment 1 and 4 also, and segment 5 and 8 also. The left hepatic vein, the leftmost branch, is going to drain segment 2 and 3, and this major tributary of left hepatic vein is going to drain segments 3 and 4 also, right? So the hepatic veins are intersegmental. Right, so hepatic veins, how are they formed? If you just remember the histological architecture of the liver, the hexagonal hepatic lobules which we had studied, hexagonal, at the center of each hexagon there was a central vein. So those central veins are going to unite to form the hepatic veins of this right lobe of liver. Will be drained by this right hepatic and middle hepatic veins. Then main portal fissure, middle hepatic vein will drain the adjacent parts of the right as well as left lobe. So these are all being formed by the union of various those central veins of the hepatic lobules, right? Then attachment of these veins to the IVC, which we have already studied, it helps holding the liver in its position. Now, what is the clinical significance of the blood supply of liver? Lot of it we have already talked about. The more common variety of right or left hepatic artery that arises as a terminal branch of hepatic artery proper may be replaced in part or entirely by an aberrant artery, which is called as accessory or replaced artery. Accessory when it is supplying blood in addition to the regular artery, replaced when that is the only part, there is no blood coming from the orthodox or the conventional origin, but there is blood coming only from the different origin, then it is called as replaced. So most common source of an aberrant right hepatic artery we have studied is the superior mesenteric, and that of a left replaced hepatic artery is the left gastric artery. Another thing is that in most people the right hepatic artery crosses anterior to the portal vein within the right free margin of lesser omentum and close to porta hepatis. The right hepatic artery crosses anterior to portal vein, so that is in almost 91% of people. In roughly 10% of people, the right hepatic artery might cross posterior to the portal vein. Also, the right hepatic artery usually crosses behind the common hepatic duct to the right side, and then it gives this cystic branch in this triangular area, which is called as Callow's triangle or the cystohepatic triangle, which we'll study in tomorrow's lecture. But so this is the variation in majority of people, whereas in some percentage of people the hepatic artery crosses in front of the common hepatic duct, and in lesser percentage of people it might be coming from the superior mesenteric artery, in which case it never crosses the common hepatic duct because it is throughout its course it is lying to the right side of the common hepatic duct. So these variations have to be kept in mind for surgeons while operating in this region, either for lobectomies of liver, in which case they will have to cut off and seal the right or the left hepatic artery. So they should be careful where is it crossing the portal vein, anteriorly or posteriorly. And in case of cholecystectomies, again we have to do dissection in this area, and we have to locate and clamp the cystic artery, which is a branch of, and we have to make sure that we save the right hepatic artery. If we end up clamping the right hepatic artery also, while we actually needed to remove only the gallbladder, so we needed to clamp only the cystic artery. But if the surgeon ends up clamping even the right hepatic artery, so the blood supply to whole of right functional lobe of liver will be gone, and it will undergo necrosis. So the surgeon has to be doubly sure that he is not clamping the right hepatic artery but only the cystic artery. So for that he needs to know what relation it is in with the common hepatic duct, because we want to avoid injury to the common hepatic as well as the common bile ducts as well, right? So these variations have to be kept in mind while operating in these areas. Okay, so then there is that liver is easily injured because it is large and fixed in position and friable, that is, it's comparatively soft in texture, and often a fractured rib that perforates the diaphragm that tears the liver. Because of liver's great vascularity and friability, liver lacerations often cause considerable hemorrhage and right upper quadrant pain. So in such cases, surgeon has to decide whether to only remove the foreign material and the contaminated or devitalized tissue by dissection, or if there is extensive damage, then he might have to undertake a lobectomy or a segmentectomy as well. Then coming to the lymphatic drainage of liver, I will just go over this thing quickly. It is a major lymph producing organ in the posterior abdominal wall, and then in the posterior mediastinum part of thorax we will be studying about cisterna chyli and left thoracic duct. So uh, up to one half of the lymph entering the thoracic duct, it is coming from the liver. So liver is the major producer of lymph within the abdominal cavity. So where do they originate? The lymph of the liver is originating between the in the spaces of Descemet, then in the spaces of Moll, which we have studied in the histological structure of liver, and those will constitute the the liver parenchyma close to surface of liver. The lymph from that will drain a superficial lymphatic in the subperitoneal fibrous capsule of liver, that is also called as Gleason's capsule, and which forms its outer surface. Deep lymphatics will accompany the branches of the hepatic arteries and portal veins, and they will come out through the porta hepatis. Right, so most of the lymph is found in the perisinusoidal spaces, again spaces of Descemet, and they drain to the deep lymphatics surrounding the intralobular portal triodes. Superficial lymphatics from anterior aspect of the diaphragmatic and bristle surfaces of liver and the deep lymphatic vessels accompanying the portal triodes, they are going to converge towards the lymph nodes lying near the porta hepatis. These are called as the hepatic lymph nodes. The superficial lymphatics, then they drain to the hepatic lymph nodes scattered along the hepatic vessels and ducts in the lesser omentum. From those hepatic lymph nodes, the lymph is going to drain into lymph nodes surrounding the origin of celiac artery. Those are the celiac nodes, and from there it is going to enter the cisterna chyli. So in fact, efferent lymphatic vessels from hepatic nodes drain into celiac, which in turn drain into cisterna chyli, and from there the lymph enters the thoracic duct. Superficial lymphatics from posterior aspect of the diaphragmatic and visceral surfaces, they drain towards the bare area of liver, somewhere towards here. So from the bare area, the lymph will drain into phrenic lymph nodes related to inferior surface of the diaphragm, right? Or they will join the deep lymphatics that have accompanied the hepatic veins and converging to the IVC, and from here the lymph will pass through the diaphragm to drain into the posterior mediastinal lymph nodes. Then efferent lymphatic vessels from these lymph nodes, they will join either the right bronchomediastinal this lymphatic duct, or it will join the left thoracic duct, right? And a few lymphatic vessels, however, follow different routes. From the posterior surface of left lobe of liver, they will go to the left gastric lymph nodes. From the anterior central diaphragmatic surface, they will go along the falciform ligament to the parasternal lymph nodes, and along the round ligament, that is ligamentum teres of the liver, they will go to the umbilicus and lymphatics of anterior abdominal wall. The nerve supply of liver, as we had done, one of the contents of the right free margin of lesser momentum is the hepatic plexus. Where is the hepatic plexus coming from? It is the largest derivative of the celiac plexus. And how is it formed? And its branches accompany the branches of the hepatic artery and hepatic portal vein to the liver. It consists of sympathetic fibers from the celiac plexus and parasympathetic fibers coming from the anterior and posterior vagal trunks, which you have studied in the stomach. And the nerve fibers accompany the vessels and biliary ducts of the portal triad. Main function is vasoconstriction. Other than that, the function is not very clear. So other clinical aspects of the liver, I will go over them quickly. I know the lecture has been stretched quite far, so just a few more minutes. Now, if the patient is lying supine, this is the lowest part of the lumbar vertebral column somewhere, then this is the concavity of the sacrum, somewhere here is the sacral promontory. So these are the two most dependent parts of the peritoneal cavity in the supine position. This is the rectovesical pouch in case, or the pouch of Douglas in case of the male, or the this rectouterine pouch in case of the females. And this is the pouch of Morrison, or the hepatorenal pouch, or the right posterior subhepatic space. These two are the most dependent parts in the supine position, right? So of the two gravity dependent recesses of abdominopelvic cavity in the supine position, the hepatorenal recess is the upper one, receiving drainage from the omental bursa, that is the lesser sac, through the epiploic foramen, and it is also receiving drainage from upper abdominal, that is supracolic portions of the greater sac. So any infection of the liver or the gallbladder or the right kidney or of the lesser sac, that is going to drain and reach this part if the patient is bedridden, lying supine. So, or infection of the peritoneum. Peritonitis may result in formation of localized abscesses, which are collections of purulent exudate or pus in various parts of peritoneal cavity, and hence a common site for pus to collect is the right or the left subphrenic recess or the space. This should be actually called as subhepatic. That is a technically more correct term. Subphrenic abscesses are more common on the right side because of the frequency of ruptured appendices, because the appendix is lying in the right iliac fossa, and that communicates with the right subhepatic space via the right this paracolic gutter. So if the patient is lying supine, so from the right iliac fossa, the infection can gravitate downwards and backwards into the hepatorenal pouch. So that is why the infections of the right subhepatic space are more common because of ruptured appendices or because of perforated duodenal ulcers. Because of the right subphrenic recess is continuous with the hepatorenal recess, which is the lowest part of the peritoneal cavity when supine, pus from a right subphrenic abscess may drain into the hepatorenal abscess, especially this right subphrenic. This is referring to the right anterior uh, the subphrenic space, and it may drain into the right posterior subphrenic recess, which is actually the hepatorenal recess, especially when patients are bedridden. So a subphrenic, which is actually referring to the subhepatic abscess, that is drained by an incision inferior to or through the bed of the 12th rib, which is lying lower to the lowest part of the pleural sac, then hence making it unnecessary to create an opening in the pleura. An anterior subphrenic abscess, which is lying anterior aspect, it is often drained through a subcostal incision, so lying below the costal margin, inferior and parallel to the right costal margin. Then just a few more things. Now, palpation of the liver. How do you palpate liver in a patient? Ask the patient to lie in a supine position. Now, liver does move with respiration. When the patient inhales, the diaphragm is going to move down, the right dorsal diaphragm is going to move down, that is going to push the liver down. So what you do is keep your left hand behind the right costal margin, and with your right hand you invaginate the fingers of your right hand deep to and just inferior to the right costal margin, and then ask the patient to inhale, right? So what has happened? Where do you keep your right hand? Lateral to rectus abdominis and inferior to the right costal margin. Patient is asked to take a deep breath as the examiner presses posterior-superiorly. So posteriorly also and superiorly also, just below the costal margin, and pulls anteriorly with the left hand, pushing the liver forwards also. And by inhaling, the liver is going to come down. So you can feel the inferior margin of the liver if it is enlarged. And liver is a soft and highly vascular organ which receives a large amount of blood immediately before it enters the heart. How? Because it is receiving portal uh, uh, blood coming from the intestine. So the total volume of blood coming from the portal circulation is as much as 1200 ml per minute. So this large volume of blood every minute 1.2 liters of blood is entering the liver before it is going to enter the heart. So, and it is going to leave the liver via hepatic veins and IVC. Now, both the hepatic veins and the IVC they lack any valves. So, a rise in central venous pressure. Suppose the heart is failing, the right heart is failing, the inferior vena cava is going to push blood into the right heart. If the right heart cannot pump the blood forwards into the right ventricle, what is going to happen is that the central venous pressure is going to rise. It is directly transmitted to the liver, which enlarges as it becomes engorged with blood. So, marked temporary engorgement stretches the fibrous capsule of the liver, producing pain around the lower right lips, particularly in the right hypochondrium. This engorgement, particularly in conjunction with increased or sustained diaphragmatic activity, for example, in athletes, if they are continuously running for long periods of time, they are going to breathe faster and deeper. That is going to produce sustained diaphragmatic activity. That is going to cause an underlying pain in the right hypochondrium. That is called as the runner's stitch. Happens in runners or athletes. That is why perhaps it explains why it is a right-sided phenomenon, because it is going to cause engorgement of the liver, which is lying in the right hypochondrium. Now, in addition to diseases which produce hepatic engorgement like congestive heart failure, bacterial and viral diseases also cause inflammation of liver, which is called as hepatitis, and they cause enlargement of the size of liver also, that is called as hepatomegaly. So when the liver is massively enlarged, its inferior edge may be readily palpated below the right costal margin. It may even reach the pelvic brim. The liver might get enlarged so much, right? So, and tumors may also enlarge the liver. Liver is a very common site of metastatic carcinoma, that is secondary cancer spreading from organs drained by the portal system of veins like small intestine, large intestine. Cancer cells may also pass to liver from the thorax, especially from the right breast, because of the communications between thoracic lymph nodes and the lymphatic vessels draining the bare area of liver. The phrenic and the hepatic lymphatics which you had done from the infero-medial quadrant of the breast, they drain via the diaphragm to the lymphatics covering the bare area of liver. So the breast carcinoma may also metastasize to liver via these communications between their lymphatics. And metastatic tumors, they form hard rounded nodules within hepatic parenchyma. Then there is something called as cirrhosis. Why does cirrhosis happen? What is cirrhosis? Liver is the primary site of detoxification of substances absorbed by the GI tract, as you would have been told in physiology and biochemistry. It is vulnerable to cellular damage and consequent scarring. How does damage repair itself? That happens by formation of fibrous tissue, which is rich in collagen. That causes scarring, and that is accompanied by regenerative nodules. Liver does have a large regenerative capacity. We can remove as much as 2/3 part of the liver. It will again regenerate from that remaining 1/3 part. However, there is an extent to which this regeneration can happen, and continuous and repetitive regeneration caused by this metabolic insult to liver by various biochemical toxins, for example alcohol, that leads to formation of these regenerative nodules rich in the scar tissue. And there is progressive destruction of hepatocytes in hepatic cirrhosis and replacement of these cells by fat and fibrous tissue. Okay. So most common, many industrial solvents like carbon tetrachloride can produce cirrhosis, but most commonly cirrhosis happens because of chronic alcoholism. So alcoholic cirrhosis is the most common of the many causes of portal hypertension. Cirrhosis, because of deposition of fibrous tissue, is going to cause an it is going to cause a resistance to the circulation of blood within the liver. One of those circulations is portal circulation, so it is going to impede the flow of blood through the portal vein, and hence it is going to produce portal hypertension. And this in cirrhosis, hepatomegaly happens, and there is a hobnail appearance or tessellated appearance of the liver surface resulting from fatty changes and fibrosis. It does have a great functional reserve, therefore, metabolic evidence of liver failure, that is, low levels of plasma proteins and high levels of these toxic byproducts, which should have been otherwise metabolized by liver, those are late to appear. Also, hyperbilirubinemia. So, all those parameters of this hepatic function tests, they are late to appear. By that time, cirrhosis has progressed to an advanced stage. So, fibrous tissue surrounds the intrahepatic blood vessels and biliary ducts, making the liver firm and impeding the circulation of blood through it. That causes portal hypertension. Now, the treatment of advanced hepatic cirrhosis may include surgical creation of a portosystemic or portocable shunt, anastomosing the portal and the systemic. One of those surgeries is called as TIPS, or transjugular intrahepatic portosystemic shunt, that will be told in the subsequent lecture on portal hypertension and portal system. Another thing is liver transplant. So the person who is in an advanced stage of cirrhosis, or who is, for any reason, if is in hepatic failure, he can receive a liver transplant either from a person who has died and wishes to, and he had expressed the wish to donate his liver, so that is uh, diseased the donor liver, and as opposed to that, even living donor liver transplant is possible, again because of the huge regenerative capacity of liver. So living donor liver transplant is possible because human liver regenerates and returns to its normal size shortly after surgical removal of part of the organ. Okay, another clinical importance is Pringle maneuver. What is Pringle maneuver is, if suppose a patient comes to you with blunt abdominal trauma, there is a lot of bleeding happening because from the liver, and you cannot stop the bleed. So as a temporary measure, what you can do is compress the right free margin of the lesser omentum, because that is containing the chief blood supply of liver, that is the hepatic artery and the portal vein. So if you just press and ligate the right free margin of lesser omentum, you are going to compress the hepatic artery as well as portal vein, so all the blood supply to liver will be temporarily stopped, and that will help in temporarily stopping the bleeding from the liver, even though bleeding from the hepatic veins is going to continue because of backward flow of blood, but there will be no further blood coming into liver from the hepatic artery and the portal vein. That is called as the Pringle maneuver. Last two things are, there is an amoebic liver abscess, which is a type of liver abscess caused by amoebiasis because of involvement by the trophozoites of entamoeba histolytica. You will be studying about this in your second year in microbiology. But basically what happens is that 90% of patients, they are asymptomatic, and how is it diagnosed is that either there will be colitis, bloody stool with mucus, abdominal pain or diarrhea, or there might be, the patient will undergo scanning of upper abdomen for some other reason, or for this colitis, and an abscess will be found within the liver. So the abscess is usually filled with pus that is called as anchovy sauce pus. Anchovies are actually fishes, and this sauce is not made in India, but because of its description by Western surgeons, this term is called as anchovy sauce pus that is present in amoebic liver abscess. And there is another thing called as hydrated cyst of liver, which is caused by the parasite Echinococcus granulosus, in which cysts and further daughter cysts are present within the liver. And the principal complications are infection or biliary tract fistula. Fistula is a tubular passage creation between two cavities, and it might rupture into the peritoneum, or even through the diaphragm it might rupture into the pleural cavity. So diagnosis is easy with ultrasound and CT scanning, and surgery remains the most effective treatment. We have to remove the cysts by surgery, and post-operative complications might arise, and radical surgical approaches give better results and should be used in most cases. And its complications are biliocutaneous fistula, that is, bile might start coming out through an opening at the surface of the skin, and infection of the residual cavity. If a cavity is left behind even after surgery, that might get again reinfected. New therapeutic strategies include endoscopic percutaneous medical therapies with surgery, and have allowed an improvement in morbidity and mortality due to hydrated cysts of liver. Right? That's all about liver. Thank you.